Hi everyone, I hope you had a good fall break. This is going to be a two-part lecture on sentence structure. For each part, there is a brief Canvas quiz for you to complete. You can find those quizzes on the Canvas site under modules or under quizzes. Also, a reminder that now that you have turned in the draft of Project 2 of the critique, you will be completing peer review for this project. The instructions for completing peer review for Project 2 are slightly different. I am having you download the peer review prompt sheet and actually complete all of the questions on that sheet for this peer review. The reason why I'm doing this is just to encourage you to dig into your peers project a little more deeply. Some of the comments last time that you submitted for the review were a bit more praising your peers' work, pointing out things that they did well, and that's a really important part of peer review. It is really important to provide some support for your peer. But this time I'm hoping to encourage you to give your peer some advice about the actual content. There were a number of comments about fixing grammatical mistakes maybe, and those are important comments as well, but I'm really hoping that this time you will dig into your peers' content and really help them improve in that way. Remember, peer review should be very useful for your peer as they revise the projects. You might want to think back to the type of feedback I am giving. Not that I expect your feedback to be at all similar to mine, but as far as how I engage with the content of your papers and point out ways in which you can improve to either conform better with the genre that you're being asked to write in, or to meet more of the assignment requirements. You may have noticed for a lot of you, I encouraged you to look at your language choice, to consider how you might improve the organization or improve your argumentative claims. These are all types of comments that will be very useful for your peers. I'm also asking you to complete this peer review prompt sheet ahead of the peer review that we'll be doing in class to hopefully encourage good conversation to occur during the class in which we spend the whole time just reviewing each other's work. So check that out. We will be doing a peer review on October 15th, I think it is, that Monday. Check the course schedule if you have any questions about that. But definitely look at the peer review assignment on Canvas to make sure that you are doing what I'm asking you to do this time for peer review. So back to our sentence structure workshop that I'm going to be walking you through today. Again, this is in two parts. For each part, there is a brief Canvas quiz for you to complete. Hopefully these quizzes will be useful for you as you consider the types of sentence structures that you write in, and how you can vary your sentence structure, how you can revise it to be more clear for your intended audience. So I've titled this workshop Sentence Structure, Writing with Meaning and Clarity. We're going to start off by looking at a very unique example of sentence structure. I'm sure many of you recognize this sort of communication. This is texting. And we have interesting options for sentence structure in texting, as this one points out. We can use things like emojis and actually communicate solely through those, as is done in this example. So every type of communication we use has different requirements for the sentence structure. And I want you to think of it in terms like that. Yes, there's a component of sentence structure that comes down to correctness, and that's where we start getting into talking about grammar and mechanics and punctuation. We'll be doing a little bit of that in this workshop, but I really want you to think about how the sentence structures you use can help your audiences understand what you are trying to communicate. In this case, in the example of texting, we actually have really unique options for the sentence structure in which we might use emojis, as these two begin communicating completely in emojis. But you'll also see that they use unique sentence structures when they start to write in actual alphabetical characters. You'll notice that they don't use a lot of punctuation. It's a little loose with that. They may shorten certain words in order to communicate more quickly. Those are types of sentence structures and methods of communication that are completely acceptable when you are writing in text. It is acceptable according to the type of devices that you are using to communicate with, and those devices have encouraged us to communicate in certain ways. It's the same with any type of writing that you do. So you know a lot about sentence structure already. As far as what determines a sentence's structure, well, there are certain words put in certain order. When you add punctuation to that, it actually will change the structure that you use. For example, you'll notice on this slide, I have all questions. I conclude these questions with a question mark, and the fact that I am composing in questions, that impacts the sentence structure decisions that I've made. I write here what determines a sentence's structure instead of a declarative statement, such as certain aspects of sentences determine their structure. So you have all kinds of choices when you write sentences, all kinds of choices for their structure. We've talked a lot about choices in this class. We started off reading How to Read Like a Writer, and the author of that piece talks a lot about structure, a lot about choices and how they impact our writing. So one thing you might be wondering is how you can revise sentences to improve their structure. Well, that really depends on your objectives for certain sentences and who you are writing those sentences for. I want you to consider this quote from Carol Rowe Apalding. She writes, "How you say a thing is as important as what you are saying. Language is not just a container for the package, it is the package." When you consider what she's stating here, it can give you a new perspective on language. The fact that how you say things is just as important as the content. When you have been working on your projects for this class, you may have noticed that You don't just pay attention to one thing while writing. You don't just pay attention to, this is the information I'm trying to get across, so let me just write this down in the hopes that I'm going to communicate this to my readers. You also instinctively often can consider precisely how you are writing this. It's not just what you are communicating, but how you are communicating that information that really results in the complete expression. And I think Roa Paulding really communicates that here, where she writes that language is not just a container for things. How we say those things, how we write those things, that's an integral part to the entire communication. Now, this can actually impact how you write individual sentences. But what is sentence structure anyway? Again, each sentence's structure is the result of choices you make as a writer. For example, you might write different sorts of sentences according to their function, and a sentence's function might change the structure you decide to use. For example, if you are just giving evidence to a reader, if you're providing information, you might write sentences with a particular structure. But if you are trying to grab the reader's attention, you might use a different sort of structure. For example, if I'm going to give information about a vacation I took, and I'm describing how we got there, I may use certain types of structure to my sentences. They may be long and detailed, with a lot of parts that all need to work together in order to communicate how we organize, plan for, and completed this trip. But if I am trying to grab the reader's attention, I might use much shorter sentences. A lot of you, when you were working on Project 1, you spent a lot of time focusing on your introduction because you know that this should try to grab the reader's attention. And I saw in a lot of your projects totally different types of sentence structures used in the introduction versus everywhere else. Some of you got really creative with your sentence structures, and I encourage you to do that. What you're doing there is you're realizing that the structure of the sentences you are using actually impact how the readers are going to interact with that information. So when you're trying to grab a reader's attention in a piece of writing, for example, you might use really short sentences. You might use just the word stop with an exclamation point. That is a sentence on its own. That is a complete sentence. But its structure is very unique. It's only a single word. And it's that structure that is actually giving that sentence some of its power. That's where some of that sentence's power comes from. So you can partially think of sentence structure as a way to influence your readers and to take advantage of power that's available in your sentences. So the rhetorical situation impacts your sentences and the sentence structures that you decide to use. We haven't talked too much about rhetoric yet. I introduced the concept in an earlier class this semester. You may remember some of the definitions that I presented to you for rhetoric, one of them being from a professor I had who I really respect, and her definition was always situated strategic discourse. And we talked about the different parts of that. What does it mean for language to be situated? What does it mean for it to be strategic? And what is discourse? How does that really work? So the rhetorical situation is part of rhetoric. It is basically what surrounds a piece of writing or a communication more generally. Some of the things that surround and that influence a communication is, for example, the genre. You're being asked to write in various genres this semester. We wrote in the genre of the profile for the first project. Now you are working in the genre of the critique. And you noticed that when we looked at examples of a profile and examples of a critique, they have different features. They look a little bit different. Those are different genre features. You also have different types of audience for your writing and your communications. But like I said, you can think about this in terms of any type of communication. So you may think about the ways in which you talk to close friends and how that might be different from talking to your instructors, like me, for example. Or you might think about how writing a comment on the internet is different from writing an email to your grandmother. You use different strategies in that communication. And in that instant, you are thinking about the rhetorical situation and about how the person who is going to receive this communication, how that changes the ways in which you compose it. You may have a different purpose for your communication. For example, the difference between explaining a complex topic and making an argument that you're passionate about. Those different purposes might impact the different types of sentences you use. Also, depending on the medium, this is basically where you're writing this. I think a really good example of this is you look at the sentence structures used in tweets versus those used on a blog. On a blog, you would probably expect complete sentences. You may even expect complete paragraphs, a lot like what you would see published in a magazine or in a news article. But a tweet is very short. So you see different types of sentence structures there. You may see incomplete sentences. You may see abbreviations for things like shaking my head, SMH, or laughing out loud, LOL. Those are things that are changing the sentence structures and things that the composer of those tweets hopes that their audience will really understand because of the medium that they are communicating in. So you have a rhetorical situation throughout college, and it is academic writing. You are now in college and expected to begin writing like an academic, writing in an academic setting. And some of you might think, I am in college now and I need to write long, complicated sentences. Well, the thing is, writers experienced in different genres make choices based on their purpose and the audience that they expect to read their communications. Scholars in various areas of study use specialized vocabulary and sometimes use really complex sentences. So you may start reading that stuff and think, oh, I need to start doing that too. I need to also write in long, complicated sentences using very specialized vocabulary. But you don't necessarily need to. Academic writing does require certain things of you, but it doesn't actually require you to write in long, complicated sentences. But it does require you to say what you think, to respond to what you read and hear, and to do so clearly and efficiently for your audience. Those are the things that writing in an academic setting, writing in college, requires you to do. Now, sometimes that may result in a long, complicated sentence. But just because you're writing in that setting doesn't mean that you absolutely do need to write in long, complicated sentences. And honestly, a lot of people who are writing in academic settings, for example, professors who are writing for academic journals, sometimes they use long, complicated sentences, and they really shouldn't, because they are obscuring their meaning. Or they're just making their meaning so complicated that it can be understood by just very few people. So they're not reaching as many, as great of an audience as they could. I'm going to use this presentation as an example of what I'm considering in my rhetorical situation here. So to create this PowerPoint, I thought about my audience, and that's all of you. That is all of the students who I'm going to give this to this semester. So I have a purpose here. I'm trying desperately to keep your interest. I'm probably not always doing that really well, but I'm always trying to keep your interest. I am presenting this to you. I'm not just giving it to you to read. I would have made these slides look quite a bit different if I was just giving this to you to read. For example, I might have included a lot more information on them. But I expect that you are going to listen to this and watch this at the same time that you're reading this. So that impacted how much text I included on these slides and impacted the explanation that I'm providing for them. Who I am, I'm an instructor of composition and a writing center coordinator. So I'm thinking about my role when I created this PowerPoint as well. This is also often a PowerPoint that I use during class, actually in-person classes. In this case, I'm recording it and presenting it to you digitally. So that also impacts my communication and what I'm thinking about as I created this PowerPoint as I'm presenting it to you now. So digging more into the example of this PowerPoint, we can look at the difference here between these definitions of rhetorical situation. So on the right, I have the definition of rhetorical situation that I used in 2 slides ago. And I have on that slide, the rhetorical situation of your writing project impacts the sentence structures you use. So I found another definition of rhetorical situation that I included on the left. A rhetorical situation is the context of a rhetorical act made up, at a minimum, of a rhetor, a speaker or writer, an issue or exigence, a medium, such as a speech or a written text, and an audience. So we can begin to think about the difference between these 2 definitions of rhetorical situation, and then consider why I chose to use the one on the right and not the one on the left. So you may be thinking, well, the one on the right is a lot shorter. It doesn't use terms like exigence and rhetor. It doesn't use these little parentheticals that are included in this one on the left. It's a little snappier. It's a little bit more to the point. So again, if you think back to my purpose, I'm trying to keep your attention. If I would have included that definition on the left, I would have lost a lot of you immediately. I can practically hear some of you snoring through the definition of rhetorical situation that's on the left. So if I have any prayer of keeping your attention through this, I'm going to use the definition on the right, hoping that at the very least, maybe it's a little bit shorter, maybe it'll keep your attention, and it communicates really just as much as the longer one does. But it's a little easier for my audience to read that definition on the right, to read that on a slide. I can get through it more quickly. That was the choice I went with, according to my rhetorical situation here. All right. So I want to go back to that quote from Roe Apalding. She writes, "How you say a thing is as important as what you're saying. Language is not just a container for the package, it is the package." If you go to quiz number 1 in our Canvas site, you can go to modules and go to Project 2 Critique, and you will see 2 quizzes for the sentence structure. So this is the first quiz. The access code for the quiz is the word nevertheless without quotation marks, all lowercase. Just type that in when it asks you for the access code, and you can complete that quiz, which asks you a question about Roe Apalding's quote.